She's the first woman in British history whose name has survived. Her statue sits in the centre of London in pride of place, and yet she burned London to the ground. Thousands of people pass her every year, yet we hardly know anything about her. We don't know how old she was, where she was born. We don't even know her name. All we know about her was written by people who never met her hundreds of miles away. She will never tell us her own story, and yet many others have told hers. This is the story of Boudica. Boudica is born into a period in Britain we call the Iron Age. We know nothing about her life before she gets married, but we do know a bit about what Britain is like at the time. Britain isn't one big country yet. Instead, there are lots of different tribes that look after smaller areas. The one Boudica ends up in is called the Iceni tribe, and they live in modern-day Norfolk. But we don't know if Boudica is born there, or if she's born somewhere else and moves into the Iceni when she gets married. Iron Age people make these big earthen castles called hill forts, which you can still see in places like Old Sarum. And something really cool we know about Iron Age people is that in battle, you try and make yourself look really weird and scary. You can wash your hair in this stuff called lime to make it go all stiff, and you paint each other with these blue patterns. When Boudica was a child, she would know about this thing called the Roman Empire. Maybe you've heard of it. Some British tribes pay taxes to Rome and get help from the Romans in return. British people buy Roman wine and glass and figs. It's kind of fashionable to have this expensive, beautiful stuff from a long way away. But Britain is still on the fingertips of the Roman Empire, a distant island on the edge of the world. Until Claudius. In 43 CE, 17 years before Boudica's revolt, 1,000 Roman ships from Boulogne set off towards Britain. 40,000 men are aboard, including soldiers from Bulgaria, Albania and the Netherlands, and war elephants. Can you imagine being an Iron Age Briton, living in your little roundhouse your whole life, and seeing a freaking elephant come towards you over the horizon? Emperor Claudius himself parades through Colchester with the elephants in victory. Some tribes fight the Romans, especially in Devon, Cornwall, Wales, the north of England and Scotland. But some tribes do comply, in return for the benefits they get from being allied to Rome. And one of those tribes is the Iceni. Just 4 years after the invasion, our girl Boudica marries an Iceni man called Prasutagus, and if she isn't already an Iceni, she becomes one now. The Iceni pay their taxes to Rome, and to keep that sweet tax money coming, the Romans give them lavish gifts in return. Boudica probably has a big wedding with lots of roasted animals, music, storytelling, and probably some Roman guests too. Within 3 years of the wedding, she has 2 kids, both girls. 3 years after Boudica's wedding, the Roman governor decides it's too much work to keep putting down rebellions all the time. It's going to be a lot easier to just confiscate all British weapons. Britons are really furious about this, but there's not much they can do. The Romans are way stronger militarily, and Boudica's husband, Prasutagus, is installed as the puppet king of the Iceni, who will do what the Romans tell him and enforce the weapons ban. So now, Boudica is a queen. She is living as good a life as you can in Iron Age Britain. But even with a puppet king on the throne, the Romans keep getting more and more repressive. Under Emperor Nero, some Britons are driven off their land, some are enslaved, skulls of rebels are displayed on poles as a warning. He takes money from the Britons to build the Temple of Claudius in Colchester, which is made of stone, bigger than anything the Britons there have seen before, built with British slave labour and surrounded by guards. And then something happens to turn Boudica against the Romans. One story says that one day the Roman procurator says, "Oh, all those lavish gifts we gave you, we'd like that money back now, please." And the British are like, "What do you mean? They were gifts." And the Romans say, "No, they were loans. And now they're due." Another story says that Boudica's husband dies, and in his will he splits up his kingdom. Part of it goes to the Romans, and part goes to his daughters, Boudica's children. And then the Romans read the will, and they say, "Daughters inheriting? Girls can't inherit. That must be a mistake. Let's cross that bit out, so we get all the land instead." Soldiers turn up at Boudica's house, and they take clothes, furniture, jewellery, animals, and even people. When they have taken everything they want, they let their enslaved people rummage through the leftovers. Boudica is whipped, and her daughters, who are aged somewhere between 10 and 13 years old, are assaulted. Whichever one is the true story, either way, this is war. So Boudica gathers her people and gets ready to go on the march. She gets the Iceni and another local tribe, the Trinovantes, and she marches on Colchester. As she moves through the countryside, more Britons join her. Luckily for her, the main Roman army is in Ynys Môn, Anglesey, in Wales. Yes. Leaving Colchester virtually undefended. Boudica's army kills everyone inside and burns the place to the ground. 1,900 years later, this head of Emperor Nero is found in a river with a big jagged neck hole. Maybe they cut it off and threw it in the river. Next, she marches on London. Unlike Colchester, which is a British town taken over by Romans, London is founded by Romans shortly after their invasion. As she approaches, more people start following her. Not just warriors, but children, the elderly, the wounded, and they start moving very slowly. So slowly that there's time for a message to get to the Roman army. The Roman governor, Suetonius Gaius Paulinus, takes 1,000 cavalry and rushes them down to London. And they get there first, even though they have 4 times further to travel than Boudica does. When he gets to London, he finds it pretty deserted. Most of the inhabitants have already got the heck out, and the only people left are people who can't evacuate. The elderly, the disabled, and those who don't want to evacuate. They don't want to leave their homes and their businesses with all their stuff in. London has no walls and no soldiers, and he has 1,000 men to face a 60,000 strong army. So, Suetonius Paulinus has 2 options. Either stay and try and defend the town with your tiny force, or leave London to its fate and hide out while you wait for reinforcements. Which would you choose? Suetonius Paulinus chooses to leave. He declares an evacuation and marches his men out of the city, while the residents run alongside him, begging them to stay. He ignores them and heads to St. Albans. When Boudica reaches London, she is merciless. No prisoners are taken. People are cut down from chariots or lynched, heads are thrown in the river, and blood runs through the streets. To this day, there is a layer of ash in London's archaeology called the Boudican Destruction Horizon, the single coolest name for anything in archaeology. But Boudica still isn't done. Now, her army heads to St. Albans. Suetonius Paulinus abandons that town too. Once again, anyone who doesn't leave is killed and the town is burned to the ground. And it's after 3 towns have been burned down that Roman reinforcements finally arrive. Now, Suetonius Paulinus is ready to face Boudica in open battle. So, let's match up our opponents. The Britons versus the Romans. Your contestants, Painting themselves into the blue corner, it's the Britons. They've got numbers on their side, tallying up to 100,000 strong and trained to fight since childhood. Their long swords and javelins are really high quality when they have them. Unfortunately, many of them only have farm implements. No armour weighing them down, but that means they can be more nimble and run further and faster, and they get an extra speed boost from their chariots. They've also got the home crowd cheering them on from the sidelines, the children and elderly forming a ring of carts at the back where they can watch in safety. And in the red corner, the Italian battalion, the legionnaires from elsewheres, it's the Romans! Only 1/10 of the number of the Britons, they are going to have to use their other advantages to their fullest. They have military discipline, they have a chain of command, and they've had a lot of practice with their battle tactics. Their swords are shorter, so they don't have as much reach as the Britons, but they have more armour and more equipment. They also have a terrain advantage. They get here first, so they're able to pick the battlefield. To this day, we don't know where they picked, but Suetonius Paulinus must have picked something good. The Britons charge, but they're forced by the terrain to go through a narrow valley where their numbers don't mean as much. The Romans can just toss their javelins in and it'll definitely hit someone. They're so tightly packed that they have to crawl over their comrades' bodies. They don't have enough room to swing their long swords, and their chariots just get in the way. The Romans have shorter swords, so they can swing them in smaller spaces, and their cavalry ducks around the Britons and attacks them in the side. The Britons lose their nerve and run. They can't fight these trained professionals, even with much greater numbers. But when they run, they get stuck behind the row of carts and are slaughtered. 70 to 80,000 Britons die, and the Romans return to St Albans, London, and Colchester, where they rebuild and will rule for the next 400 years. As for Boudica herself, no one knows for sure what happens to her. Some say she's captured and dies of an illness. Some say she takes poison rather than be captured. Perhaps she was killed on the battlefield, but the field has never been found, and no grave has ever been identified. The Romans put the Iceni firmly under their heels, covering their land with forts so they can't pick their noses without the Romans knowing. And for centuries, Boudica's story fades into obscurity. So that is the story as we generally tell it. In England, we tend to hear this story when we're pretty young, so you tend to get the kid-friendly version. It's on the national curriculum for Key Stage 1, so you're telling this story for kids aged between 5 and 8 years old. And if you are one of those kids and your teacher wants you to do a project on Boudica, then you can stop watching here. This first part of the video is plenty to get you through it. Valerie Wilding's book on her is also really good. Good luck. But if you're a grown-up who's not heard the story since then, you might not know that there's more to it. Or should I say, less to it. Because almost all of what I just told you might not be true. And it doesn't answer the question. If Boudica burned London to the ground and killed everyone inside, why does she get a statue in one of the most prestigious areas of London? So, Britons don't have writing before the Romans turn up. Boudica herself is illiterate. So what that means is we don't have any British person writing Boudica's story down. The only people who write it down are Romans. And not even many Romans. In fact, everything we know about Boudica comes from just two Roman writers called Tacitus and Cassius Dio, who is, I'm sorry to tell you, also known as Dio Cassius. Neither of whom ever meet her or even see her. They both disagree massively on big parts of the story, like exactly why Boudica starts her revolt. Tacitus says it's because the Romans stole Boudica's land and assaulted her daughters. Dio says it's because the Romans called in their loans. Tacitus says that Boudica takes poison rather than be captured. Dio says that she was captured. Neither of these authors were actually there. Tacitus's father-in-law was in Britain at the time, so he might have actually seen Boudica. But Tacitus is writing about 50 years after Boudica's death. Dio is writing about 150 years after her death. So we tend to say Tacitus's story is more likely to be true, but that's not saying much. Each author gives Boudica a big hero speech to her troops, which is entirely made up. First off, they're totally different. And also, if Boudica did a speech at all, there's no way that a Roman was in earshot, understood the language, remembered it word for word, and translated it into Latin for us. So neither Tacitus nor Dio know a lot about Boudica. They have no idea what she was up to for most of her life before the rebellion. Dio gives a physical description of her, saying she's very tall with long red hair, but we don't know where he got that from because Tacitus doesn't describe her at all. And we're not even sure that her name was Boudica. Boudica just means victory in the local language, so it might have been a nickname. Some people have wondered if Boudica even existed at all, or if she was just a cool story like King Arthur. The one solid thing we have is that Colchester, London and St Albans are burned down in 60 CE. The Boudican destruction horizon is real, but the woman it's named after might not be. So, neither of these authors are telling the story with dry facts only. They're both adding details, writing cool speeches, and embellishing it a bit. And the way they tell the story isn't just affected by their personal taste, but by the political situation going on during their lifetimes. Romans aren't a monolith. They have factions and divisions between themselves, and they use the story of Boudica to prop up their own political positions. Tacitus is a part of the senatorial class in Rome, which is losing power to the emperor. Tacitus sees the emperor style of government as everything that's making Rome worse, mouldy with bribery, corruption and nepotism. Whereas barbarians like Boudica, and people like his father-in-law who was there, are noble. The last bastion of freedom and virtue. Tacitus's Boudica says, "We British are accustomed to women commanders in war. I am descended from mighty men. But I am not fighting for my kingdom and wealth now. I am fighting as an ordinary person, for my lost freedom, my bruised body and my outraged daughters. You will win this battle or perish. This is what I, a woman, plan to do. Let the men live in slavery if they will." Now this politicking between senators and emperors is something that the real-life Boudica, of course, has no idea about. Tacitus has given her this cool speech to make it seem like she agrees with him about something she doesn't know about. And this starts a tradition that will carry on for hundreds of years. Everyone who writes about Boudica gives her a different cool speech. Dio does the same thing. He really doesn't like Emperor Nero, so his Boudica goes after him specifically, calling him a bad lyre player and a singing girl who plays the tyrant. Dio is also a bit of a Rome bro, and he has Boudica call Roman men effeminate for such decadent acts as bathing in warm water, eating fancy food, drinking unmixed wine, anointing themselves with myrrh, and sleeping on soft beds with boys, quote, even ones past their prime. A true alpha male has cold baths only. Unmixed wine is for sissies. A masculine man submits to an emperor who's good at playing the lyre. Again, Boudica doesn't know if Nero is good at the lyre or not, and doesn't care. And they're not the only ones. In the 16th century, we're having a renaissance here in England. The printing press is making it easier for people to get their hands on Roman writing, and people find Tacitus and Dio, and they're like, wow, we have a queen too. And she's a redhead too. And she doesn't like Rome either. Now, Boudica doesn't hate the Romans for the same reason that Elizabeth I hates Rome. Elizabeth I hates Rome because it's got the Catholic Church in it. Boudica has no idea what that is. But they tell the story as if Boudica would have fought the Spanish Armada too, even though she definitely has no idea who or what they are. They use Tacitus's spelling of her name, which has 2 C's, and somewhere along the line, someone accidentally turns a C into an E, calling her Boudica. As the British Empire expands in the 17th and 18th centuries, Britain starts to think, hey, we're getting even bigger than the Roman Empire. In 1780, the poet William Cowper writes Boadicea an Ode, in which Boudica's pagan gods tell her that a new empire will arise, greater than the Romans could ever dream of. Then the progeny that springs from the forest of our land, armed with thunder, clad with wings, shall a wider world command. The way Cowper tells it, Boudica would have liked the British Empire. Don't worry if you're feeling kind of uneasy about all the slavery and genocide. Boudica is great, and she would have been cool with it. What Cowper couldn't know was that the Empire was about to kick it into high gear under another queen called Victory. Victorians love Boudica. You can read about her in Victorian children's books like School History of Rome or Our Island's Story or Beric the Briton. During the 19th century, nationalism is coming to a head. Countries all over the world are putting together tales about why the people on this side of the line all have the same story, and the people on that side of the line all have a different story. We have a song and a flag and a queen and a history book, and you have a different song and flag and queen and history book. So, in Victorian stories, Boudica isn't just a queen from one little part of England. She's a hero for all Britons. Britain is unified in revolting against the Roman invaders. You can feel like Boudica is part of your story, even if you're from Devon or Wales or Yorkshire or, weirdly enough, London or Colchester. In A.J. Church's The Count of the Saxon Shore, Britons living under Roman rule 350 years after Boudica died still cherished in their hearts the memory of the free Britain of the past and the hope of a free Britain in the future. The way they tell the story, Boudica was British and fought for Britain, even though she fought against other British tribes and killed a hell of a lot more British people than Romans. They are making Britain into one nation, and the way they tell the story, Boudica would have agreed with them. In the 20th century, suffragettes like Dora Montefiore tell Boudica's story. She visits her statue at the Houses of Parliament and she says, Boadicea in her chariot always appeared to me to be advancing threateningly on the Houses of Parliament, and she was therefore a symbol of the attitude towards Parliament of us militant women. The way she tells it, Boudica would have given women the vote. And we're still doing it! Literally, me right now, in this video. Boudica is now part of women's history, so we can use her story to say, women can do great things, they can lead armies, they can be strong warriors. Look, Boudica would agree with us. Or we might say, the Victorians were wrong. Boudica can't be a nationalist hero. Not only did she kill way more Britons than Romans, but Iron Age Britons aren't all born in Britain. There are Iron Age Britons coming from France and Spain. There's a tribe in Yorkshire called the Parisi, and one in the south called the Belgi. Britain has never been all native Britons. And by telling you about how the Iron Age Britons weren't native like we might think, I'm also saying, this country was built on immigration. You should support modern-day immigrants. Boudica's revolt is on the national curriculum for Key Stage 1, so that is a list of everything the government wants kids to learn. Just having a national curriculum is hugely political. The government has a captive audience for hours each day, and they get to decide what these future voters should learn about history. Now, you might say, well, we should tell her story without politics, without taking a side. So, let's give that a go. In 60 CE, the Romans attacked Boudica, so Boudica fought the Romans and burned down Colchester, London and St Albans before being defeated. Great! We've got rid of the speech she gives altogether, so we don't need to worry about her opinions on things. This is just the facts. Well, I guess Boudica was the name the Romans gave her. We don't want to take the Romans' side, so let's just call her an Iceni queen. Well, I guess being a queen is political, and we don't actually know if her position really matched up with what we'd call a queen, so a powerful Iceni woman. Now, you can't say CE, Common Era, because that is way too political, but you can't say AD, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, either, because that's also too political. Like, what if you don't want to call Jesus your Lord? Okay, so let's just say 1,963 years ago, and we'll just come back and update this every year. Well, I guess I have left some stuff out of this one, like maybe the Romans had a good reason to take her land, like maybe they thought they were doing the right thing. We don't want to take sides, so I'll just... The thing is, it is not possible to tell history without bias. You can't do it, and neither can I. Unless you want to talk for literally ever, you're going to have to decide which details need cutting. And someone else could always come along and argue that those details are vital context, which only a biased, one-sided narrative would leave out. Sometimes, like with CE and AD, you have multiple choices, but none of them are apolitical. Now, this doesn't mean you can just tell the story as biased as you like, because it doesn't matter. An unbiased account is something to strive for. Bias is something you should try and get as low as you can, but it's never something you can completely get to zero. So the question is not, is this history unbiased, but what biases does this history have, and can I find a history with different biases to get a different opinion? So today on the London History Show, we are going to have our first ever homework assignment. And it's totally optional. Pick a modern political position, whether it's one you agree with or not, and try and tell Boudica's story in support of that position. Can you make it look like Boudica would have supported euthanasia? Can you make it look like she would have voted to remain? Can you make it look like she was a communist? If you'd like, you can put your retellings of Boudica's stories in the comments and read each other's too. But be careful out there. Watch how you tell your history. Thank you very much for watching. I have a really exciting announcement to make. On the 4th of December at 2 p.m, I am going to be hosting an online Q&A for A-level history students with Dr. Tracy Borman, the famous historian. It's in conjunction with the National Archives, so we're going to be looking through some of their documents that are to do with the Tudors. So if you're an A-level history teacher, please visit the link in the description. You can either catch us live or you can get it on catch-up later on. A special thank you to my patrons, some of whose names you can see on the screen right now, who give me their actual factual money to keep this show going. If you'd like to join them, you can find the link to my Patreon in the description. Thank you very much.